Ladies and gentlemen, you know the song, every step you take, every move you make, we'll be watching you. That's pretty much the scenario as far as India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is concerned. It is big budget day. She's setting a record. Every move of hers, ever since she's left her home at 8:30 in the morning, has been tracked and followed and put on our television screens. That's the photo op with the Bahi Khata and her team. Nirmala Sitharaman, as we speak right now, as part of protocol, is with the President, presenting the budget to her, having a cup of tea, and God knows she will need the chai and probably some breakfast as well, because it's going to be a long day in Parliament. The budget will be presented. Possibly she'll speak for 2 hours, 2 hours, 40 minutes, we do not know, maybe 3 hours as well. And post that in Parliament, there'll be a 20-hour debate, and at many times she'll be expected to respond as well. So it's going to be a long day for her. Plus, it's going to be a day of press conferences. Plus, it's a day that that will be filled with giving interviews as well. For the moment, I'm being joined by K.V. Subramania, who is the former CEA. That's a Chief Economic Advisor, also the Executive Director at IMF right now. Mr. Subramania, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us here on Mirror Now, bright and early. Can I quickly start by asking you whether you have any idea whether a finance minister gets any sleep before budget day? It's a tense moment from them, because it's almost like a final exam, right?
So it looks like my video is not working for some reason, but I'm glad to be here. A very good morning, and it's actually midnight here in Washington, D.C. I don't think the finance minister gets much speech, because oftentimes the budget is actually budget speech, especially is written even into the wee hours of the morning. There are changes that are made in the last minutes as well. But I think they'll go to Rashtrapati Bhavan, where there is the Honorable President will serve, Finance Minister, the Minister of State, and the team that does the budget, breakfast, and then they'll go to the cabinet. In the cabinet, she'll brief the cabinet about what is there in the budget, and then she'll, head to Parliament to make her budget speech. That's the rigmarole. That's what I think. I'm quite excited. Actually, it's a long night, here in Washington, D.C. for me. I'm excited to see what is there in the budget.
Mr. Subramania, one of the guests on our show pointed out something very interesting. Here's, and she's on our screens right now, here's a finance minister who will be presenting her 7th budget. Interestingly, if you look at, former finance ministers, if you look at former teams, the team is usually older than the finance minister. In this case, a large number of people on the screens are probably just presenting their first budget or their second budget. So that is something interesting as well.
Yeah. I actually had the privilege to be involved in 4 budgets that were presented. Of those, the first 3 budgets that were presented by the Honourable Finance Minister, I had the privilege of being part of that. Yes, indeed, I think it's a very nice team. And they all will have a very, very long day today. And especially, I think the CA, he would have had a very long day yesterday as well. The economics, they were presenting it and then going on to channels. And then it will be followed by a long day today as well.
Since you spoke of the CEA, can I just ask you a quick question about jobs? What is being touted is jobless growth. As far as India is concerned, our economy is growing. We seem to be doing very well. All is well, in the words of the Chief Economic Advisor. But it seems that we are simply not generating enough jobs. Now, yesterday's data is indicating to us that every year India will have to generate 78.5 crore jobs, 5 lakh jobs, I beg your pardon, every year in the non-farm sector. Is that likely to happen? How will it happen?
So here's one area, I think, where I find the narrative and has not been reflecting the reality. I think we have to keep in mind, on a base of almost 60 crore, which is basically what the labor force is, about 60 lakhs is basically 1%. So I think when we talk about a country like India, we always have to keep the base in mind. So 60 lakh jobs or 60, 70 lakh jobs on its own seems like a large number, but it's only 1%. And I think if you look at I don't agree with the jobless growth characterization. Let's look at the facts here. Some of the alternative facts, which are actually, not quite reflecting the reality, have come because of the very poor quality CMI data. If if you use the PLFS or the CLEMS database, which actually are internationally well recognized, the RBI report which uses the CLEMS database, and I think as sitting here in IMF, I actually can vouch for the quality of that data. It has jobs have actually increased by 12.5 crores. That's basically 125 million jobs created over the last 10 years. If you look at the 2004 to 2014 period, it was only 2.5 crores, which is basically 25 million. Now there was 5 times as much jobs. Even if we take out the jobs that are basically in agriculture, even then out of the 12.5 crores, 9 crore jobs have been created in areas outside of agriculture. So I think this characterization of jobless growth does not sit well with the facts. That is not to say that we do not need to create jobs. We need to create jobs definitely because we are a young population. We have the demography actually needs to be converted into a dividend, and that is where I think about 80 lakh jobs are important. But you keep in mind that there's only 1% of the overall workforce of about 60 crores.
Okay, but the fact is that as far as job data in India is concerned, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I've seen, the data is complex and it is often confusing. For example, even if I worked for exactly 1 hour in 7 days, I will be considered employed. If I worked exactly for 30 days, in 12 months, I will be considered employed. So it's not just the number of jobs that are created, Mr. Subramania, it's also the quality of jobs. It's also how much money it is giving you.
Indeed, indeed. And I think I'm glad that you raised this point. Here again, if you look at the methodology that is used by PLFS, there is what is called the usual status. There is also the weekly status. Both of these, the usual status, for instance, asks, for work that has been done over the last entire year, while, the weekly status asks about jobs, basically employment over the last 1 week. And keep in mind that the methodology implemented by the PLFS is identical to that recommended by the ILO. So it is not the case that the methodology is any different. And when you look at in terms of quality, one of the most important parameters is wages. And if you look at wages, and the economic survey yesterday has a very clear chart, which shows that if 2021-22 compared to 2020-21, wages increased by 10%. Even if you look at, just the youth, for instance, right? In the youth, over the last 7-8 years, 3.5 crore jobs have been created, and these jobs are created actually more than 1.7 crore increase in the population. There's an article written by the former chief statistician, TCA Anant, using the PLFS data. So I think whether it is on the quantity or on the quality, unfortunately, those who actually look at bad quality data have somehow, sort of carried the narrative than the reality on jobs.
Okay. But Mr. Subramania, a simple counter question, and I ask this as a lay person, not as someone who studied economics ever in her life. If all is changa, if, wages have grown by 10%, if we are generating so many crore jobs, why are we still having to give free rations to the poor? That is a question to 81 crore Indians. That is a question I'll ask you. But before that, a piece of breaking news that is coming in, and I'd want you to weigh in on that as well. There is some source-based information coming in, which seems to suggest that there is relief for taxpayers on the card. We are being told that the income tax rebate at the lower levels, there is some tweaking that is expected there. Would you want to weigh in on this? The urban, middle-class, tax-paying Indian often feels taken for granted, like I feel taken for granted, that I don't have a voice. The poor have a voice in this country because of the sheer number, because of their sheer numbers, because of the fact that they are a vote bank. The super rich, well, what to say of the super rich? When they have the money, they simply leave the country, right? It's the middle class, the tax-paying middle class that simply doesn't seem to have a voice. Will it find a voice in this budget?
On to that question, but let me again, I'm not given to sort of grabbing headlines by saying, sab changa si. Nahin, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I'm pointing out some important facts. I think employment, these are the facts that there has been job creation. I think this headline grabbing characterization as jobless growth, things are really bad, that is what I want to avoid. I actually want to have a factual conversation rather than actually headline grabbing, stories here. I think on middle class, I completely agree with you. As a salaried individual myself, this is a cow that actually does get milked far more than it should be. I think if you look at professionals, for instance, lawyers, chartered accountants, dentists, doctors who actually run their own, sort of proprietor shops. They don't pay, even a fraction of the kind of tax that they should be paying compared to the income. And, the rebate basically, or some of the concessions for salaried class, middle class, needs to be provided. This is an area that needs work, especially proprietors, professionals, they need to actually be taxed much better. If you look at the kind of, consumption they have, whether it is actually luxury cars or the vacations they take, they're actually, that reflects their income clearly. But the salaried class ends up, getting taxed far more. And I think that is an aspect that needs to be worked on. I completely sympathize with you on that aspect.
Okay, my last question to you, realistically, what should we be expecting from this budget, given the fact that the political situation between February and now has changed, not dramatically, but it has changed?
So I would actually think that an emphasis on employment is something that is necessary. Again, I'm making a nuanced point. It is not because, employment situation is really bad, but because we need to create, adequate number of jobs so that we can have 8% growth, and growth is inclusive. Because do remember, jobs are one of the easiest way or the best way to actually generate inclusive growth. That is why, employment, actually emphasis on that is important. At the same time, I think we spoke about this, taxes, ensuring that the, middle class, the burden on them is reduced, I think is something that is welcome. Not just that, on the tax side, I would also mention that the way in which the corporates or the individuals interact with the tax authorities, and that's a critical part of the ease of doing business, that needs to be reduced so that, the ease on this is enhanced, especially, for instance, in the tax code that we have, the 1961 relic, which is also basically almost 80 years now. I think that tax code needs to be rewritten. I was part of a committee when I was a chief economic advisor where actually a new code was framed with about half the pages, 1/3 of the kind of provisions. That is really critical as well to enhance ease of doing business, especially on the tax side. And I'm hoping that that would be, an aspect. Finally, and also, I think this is something that was highlighted in the economic survey. The government needs to step out actually and, reduce its sort of some of the perverse incentives and the regulations that sort of keeps the corporate sector and the private sector shackled, release the shackles so that they can actually create more growth and jobs in the process.
Mr. Subramanian, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you'll have time to join us post the budget as well. Thanks very much for your time here on Mirror Now. Thank you. Good speaking to you.
Yes, I have a long night. Thank you.
See you. Ladies and gentlemen, more exclusive news breaks coming up on Mirror Now. Now, we are still about an hour, 15 minutes from the budget being presented in Parliament. But for the moment, this is what we are picking up. We are picking up that there could be more funds for pro-women schemes like the Ujjwala scheme, the Saubhagya scheme. We are being told that the Ujjwala scheme, there is a windfall that is likely. There is also Ayushman Bharat benefits for all above the age of 70, which is likely to be announced. Do remember that women are part of the BJP's Labharthi scheme. Essentially, people who will vote for the BJP because of the schemes, the specific schemes that are launched for them. Ujjwala Yojana was meant to target women, especially women who are poor, who belong to rural India and to the urban and to the section of urban poor in this country. So the Ujjwala scheme is one scheme that the government feels has benefited it as far as electoral returns are concerned. That scheme may get some more funds is what we are being told. Of course, Ayushman Bharat benefits for everyone above the age of 70 is likely to be announced. Does that not already exist, Mr. Ravi? I could be wrong, but I thought that already exists.
It exists, but I find that they will have to make some changes to make it more sort of attractive, and that is what is going to be the spirit. And I mentioned it yesterday in your channel that insurance sector and medical, just now also I mentioned. So these are two sectors the government will have to focus. So we'll have to focus on, especially considering the fact that the new pension scheme is being introduced, where the super senior citizens have to be taken care of. And I think this is going to be the insurance for over 70, and also the medical allowance there for over senior citizen will be a thing that I expect for sure. Because if you have to migrate to the new pension scheme, you'll have to protect the very, very senior citizens.
That is true. Mr. Ahluwalia, would you want to weigh in here? We understand the need for Ayushman Bharat. We understand the need for senior citizens to be protected. I just want to ask you why, I mean, whether you think it's right for us, for the government to tax us even on our health insurance premiums. How's that fair?
Yeah, it does sound a little ridiculous, you know. I agree with you. But you know, tax policy has to be made in a consistent way. And I'm not a tax expert. So if there is a consistency issue over there, that certain earnings are taxed consistently, irrespective of whether you're earning them because, you know, you haven't been ill and therefore you're getting a premium, you haven't used the insurance, or for whatever reason. I think that's a very fine point. You have to ask a tax expert. I don't know what that particular premium can be linked to in the galaxy of rebates. So that's not my area. I'm sorry.
No. I just wanted your opinion as someone who pays taxes and someone who probably has a health insurance as well. I just find it extremely odd to be paying tax on my health insurance premium.